my brother-in-law confidently declared. The $10 million inheritance belongs to my wife. After, the first time I heard the number out loud, it wasn't in a lawyer's office, it was in my mother-in-law's dining room, under a chandelier that had always seemed too heavy for the ceiling it hung from. Sunday lunch. Linen napkins. 2 bottles of wine that my brother-in-law brought for the label, not the taste. He said it like he was announcing the weather. The $10 million inheritance belongs to my wife, Mark declared, smiling over his glass, as if the sentence itself had a silver rim. So we'll be handling all of that. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the room. He looked at the reaction. My wife Lena froze for half a beat. Not enough for anyone else to catch. I caught it because I'd learned her small signals over 12 years, how her thumb pressed into the side of her index finger when she was deciding whether to speak. I didn't move. I kept my posture the same, shoulders relaxed, hands on my lap. I let the silence breathe just long enough to make his words hang there. Across from us, Mark's wife, my sister-in-law, Diane, lifted her eyebrows in practiced surprise like she was hearing it for the first time. She wasn't. Diane didn't do genuine surprise. She did performance. My mother-in-law Sandra gave a nervous laugh and glanced at Lena. "Oh, Mark. It's not a business meeting." Mark leaned back, wrist loose, the kind of body language men adopt when they're already sure everyone agrees with them. "It should be," he said. "This is family. Family means transparency." He said transparency the same way he said investment and legacy, words he used to sound like he wasn't just grabbing. Lena put her napkin down slowly. "What inheritance?" Mark's smile sharpened. "Don't play innocent, Lena." That's how he always started, joking voice, casual accusation. It landed better when people were holding forks. Harder to defend yourself with a mouthful of food. Sandra cleared her throat. "Your father, well, your stepfather." My father-in-law had been her second husband, Robert. He'd married Sandra when Lena was 16 and Diane was 19. He wasn't warm, but he was consistent. He didn't do loud affection. He paid bills on time, wrote notes in neat handwriting, and fixed whatever broke in the house without making a show of it. He died 8 weeks earlier. A heart attack in a hotel gym in Phoenix, of all places. He'd been there for a conference. Everyone had described it as sudden, which always felt like a word people used to avoid saying unprepared. The funeral had been clean and expensive. Mark handled the flowers, Diane handled the guest list, Sandra handled the crying. Lena handled the phone calls, the paperwork, and the awkward relatives asking what would happen to Robert's assets, as if grief was a transition period into shopping. Mark took another sip of wine. "Robert left $10 million. That's what the attorney told us. And since Diane is his daughter, it goes to her. I mean," he corrected smoothly, like he was being generous, "to Diane and, by extension, to our household." By extension. The phrase made my jaw tighten, but my face stayed calm. Lena's voice stayed level. Robert wasn't Diane's father. Mark chuckled. "Come on!" Sandra pressed her fingers to her temple. "Please don't do this at lunch." Diane lifted her glass, watching Lena the way someone watches a rival at a fundraiser. "It's fine," she said. "We should talk about it. It's not a secret." Then she turned her attention to me, not Lena. She always did that when she wanted to reduce Lena's authority. When Diane addressed me, it implied Lena needed an interpreter. "You understand," she said lightly, "that these things are complicated. There are trusts and legal structures. Mark has experience." Mark did not. Mark had opinions. I'd met Mark at a family barbecue the first year Lena and I were married. He'd arrived in a white polo shirt and sunglasses that never came off, shaking hands like he was running for office. He worked in consulting, which meant he changed his LinkedIn headline every few months and always had a new acronym to drop into conversation. He'd asked me what I did. I told him I worked in compliance for a mid-sized logistics company. Quiet job, detail-heavy, not glamorous. He'd laughed and said, "So you're like the hall monitor of adulthood." Everyone had laughed too, even Lena, because it was easier than correcting him. I wasn't offended then. I'm not offended now. I understand how people measure value. They use volume, titles, expensive shoes. My job had trained me to notice what people say when they think no one is tracking it. I looked at Diane and said, I understand that legal structures are specific. A neutral sentence, like a napkin laid flat. Mark lifted his glass in approval. Hey, exactly. He mistook my calm for agreement. That was typical. Lena's eyes moved to me for a second, checking. I gave her a small nod. Go on, not permission. Support. Lena turned back to her mother. Who told you 10 million? Sandra's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at Mark like he'd brought the number into the room. Like it was his property. Mark put his hand on Diane's knee. The attorney gave us a general idea. Nothing official yet, obviously. But Diane and I are planning ahead. Planning ahead. Another phrase. And how, Lena asked, are you involved in the attorney meetings? Diane shrugged. Mom asked us. She needed help. You've been busy. Busy, meaning Lena hadn't been performing grief in the way Diane wanted. Lena had been taking Sandra to appointments, sorting Robert's documents, and handling the calls from the hospital billing department that seemed to enjoy speaking in riddles. Mark set his glass down with care. Look, Lena, you've always been sensitive about money. We get it. You and... He flicked his eyes at me. You two are doing fine, but Diane is the one who built a real relationship with Robert. She was his daughter in every way that counts. Lena sat very still. Her face didn't change. That was how she went quiet when she was making space for the truth to sit in her chest without spilling. Robert had never adopted Diane. He'd offered. I'd seen the letter years ago, folded in an envelope with Robert's careful handwriting, because Lena had shown it to me after Sandra found it in a drawer and cried. Diane had refused, not out of principle, out of strategy. She'd been 19 and already calculating outcomes. If Robert adopted her, it would complicate her biological father's family money, small but present. Diane liked options. I didn't say any of that at the table. Lena didn't either. Not yet. Mark reached for the serving spoon like he was closing a deal. Anyway, we're going to meet with the attorney again this week. Make sure everything is protected. Taxes, investments, you know. Sandra looked relieved, as if handing decisions to Mark meant she could stop thinking. Lena didn't raise her voice. Which attorney? Diane's eyes narrowed slightly. Why? So I can attend! Diane smiled, polite and thin. It's not necessary. Mark's voice softened, the way it did when he wanted to sound patient. Lena, you've had a tough few weeks. Let us take this burden. Burden. Like the money was heavy. Like they were sacrificing themselves to carry it. I could see it, how the narrative was being built. Lena's too emotional. Diane as the responsible daughter. Mark as the capable handler. Sandra as the grateful mother. And me, by default, as the quiet husband who wouldn't understand. Mark leaned forward. Plus, he added casually, the way inheritance works is straightforward. Spouse, then children. Robert was married to Sandra. Diane is the child in this situation. Lena, he shrugged. You're grown. You have your own household. Lena's fingers tightened around her water glass, then loosened. She said, Robert wasn't my father either. Mark gave an exaggerated nod. Exactly. He thought he'd won. He didn't realize Lena's point wasn't about blood. It was about what Robert had actually written down. Sandra's voice cracked. Please, can we not fight? Robert would hate this. Diane reached across the table and squeezed Sandra's hand, her nails manicured in pale pink. No one is fighting, Mom. Lena is just... processing. Processing. Another word used to shrink someone. I watched Lena inhale slowly through her nose, then exhale. She wasn't going to give them a scene. She hated scenes. She'd grown up in a house where Diane's tears got attention and Lena's quiet got ignored. She'd learned early that showing emotion in front of people like Mark was like handing them a tool. Lena turned to me again, just for a second. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She knew I'd already started lining up questions in my head like folders. Which attorney? Which documents? Which meetings? Who had access? What had been said, and in what form? Mark was still talking, his voice louder, confident. Once it's settled, we'll make sure everyone is taken care of. Mom will be comfortable. We're not monsters. No one had accused him of being one. That was the trick, he defended against claims no one made, to plant the idea that anyone questioning him was unreasonable. Lena set her napkin back on her lap with precision. "Okay," she said. "Just that, okay," Mark blinked. Thrown off by the lack of pushback, Diane's eyes stayed on Lena, searching for the next move. Sandra exhaled in relief, as if the danger had passed. I watched Mark's hand slide his phone out of his pocket and onto his thigh, hidden under the table. His thumb moved, quick, like he was sending someone a message. He wasn't just talking, he was coordinating. Lena picked up her fork again and took a bite of her food, like the conversation had ended. Her face stayed calm. Her voice stayed soft, but under the table, her foot brushed mine once, light, deliberate. A signal she'd used for years, not here. I didn't ask questions in the car. I didn't press her at home. I let her decide when the room was private enough to let the truth out. Because if Mark and Diane were already treating 10 million like it was theirs, they had probably already taken steps. And I had learned something important in compliance. People who move confidently without paperwork usually rely on everyone else being too polite to demand it. That afternoon, when we left Sandra's house, Mark followed us to the driveway, still smiling, still acting like he'd done us a favor. "Hey," he called, like we were friends. "No hard feelings, we're all on the same team." Lena turned back and smiled politely. "Of course." Her tone was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that made people underestimate you. Mark nodded, satisfied, and walked back inside, already sure the story was written. I opened the passenger door for Lena. She slid in, buckled her seatbelt, and stared straight ahead as I started the engine. We drove 3 blocks before she spoke. "They're lying," she said quietly. "And I think they already have the documents." I kept my eyes on the road. My voice stayed even. "Tell me what you know," I said. Lena looked down at her hands. Then she lifted her phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward me at a red light. "A message thread. Sandra's name at the top. A photo attached. It was a picture of an envelope. On the front, in neat handwriting I recognized immediately, was one line. For Lena, open only if something happens to me. And beneath that, another detail that made my stomach go still. The envelope seal had already been broken. Lena's voice stayed flat, but her fingers trembled once before she steadied them. "My mom sent me this photo yesterday," she said. She found it in Robert's desk after Mark helped her clean out his office. The light turned green. I drove forward, steady, controlled, already building a timeline in my head. Because an opened envelope wasn't just disrespect, it was an action, and actions left traces, if you were patient enough to collect them. At the next stop sign, Lena looked at me and asked the question that told me she was done being managed by her sister. "What do we do," she said, "if what's inside that envelope changes everything?" I didn't answer right away. I just nodded once, kept my hands on the wheel, and chose my silence carefully. Because the next step wasn't a confrontation. It was receipts, and I already knew where to start. We didn't go home right away. I drove past our exit and kept going until the city thinned into a stretch of older storefronts and empty parking lots. Lena didn't ask why. She trusted my sense of timing the way I trusted her instincts about people. When you grow up underestimated, you learn to recognize when quiet is safer than comfort. I parked outside a closed library branch, brick building, faded banner announcing hours that hadn't been updated since before the pandemic, neutral ground. No chance of Mark dropping by, no neighbors to overhear. Only then did I ask, "Did your mom say what was inside the envelope?" Lena shook her head. She said Mark told her not to open it, that it was probably sentimental stuff. Sentimental, the word people use when they want to make something seem unimportant without actually checking. "And she listened?" I asked. "For about a day," Lena said. "Then she got nervous and took a photo of the front. That's all she sent me." I nodded. "Did she say where the envelope is now?" Lena hesitated. "She said Mark took it with him. He said he'd keep it safe until the attorney meeting." I let that settle. Not because I was surprised, but because the sequence mattered. "So," I said carefully, "Mark accessed Robert's desk, removed a sealed envelope addressed to you, opened it, and took possession of it." "Yes." "And Sandra let him." "Yes." I didn't comment on Sandra. Blame was easy. It wasn't useful. Instead, I asked, "When is this attorney meeting?" "Thursday," Lena said. "Mark said I didn't need to be there." Of course he did. I took out my phone. Not to call anyone, but to start a note. Dates, names, exact phrases. "What's the attorney's name?" I asked. "David Keller," Lena said. "Firm downtown. Robert used him for years." I typed it in. "And the inheritance amount. Did Robert ever mention 10 million to you?" Lena shook her head. "He talked about setting things up. He never gave numbers. He was careful about that." Careful, that tracked. I closed the note and turned to her. "Okay, we don't confront anyone. Not Sandra. Not Diane. Not Mark." Lena nodded immediately. No resistance. She was already there. "We don't ask for the envelope," I continued. "We don't accuse. We don't correct their story." Her jaw tightened slightly. "They think I'm weak." "They think you're quiet," I said. "There's a difference." We sat for another minute, the car ticking softly as it cooled. Then I added, "I'm going to start pulling public records tonight. Nothing invasive, just structure." Lena didn't ask how. She knew what I did for a living. She also knew I didn't move without a reason. The first thing I checked wasn't the will. It was the trust registry. Robert had always been methodical. He'd once spent 40 minutes explaining to me why he'd switched electricity providers, not because it saved money, but because the contract terms were clearer. Men like that didn't leave $10 million floating without a framework. By midnight, I'd confirmed something important. A revocable living trust had been created 4 years earlier, filed properly, updated twice since. The beneficiaries weren't listed publicly, but the existence of the trust mattered more than Mark realized. Trusts don't work the way confident men at dining tables describe them. The next morning, Lena forwarded me screenshots. A group text titled Family Estate Planning. Mark had created it. Of course he had. Mark, met with David Keller today. Everything is moving smoothly. Diane and I will manage next steps so Mom doesn't have to stress. Timestamp 9:14 a.m. Sandra. Thank you, Mark. I don't know what I'd do without you. Diane? 2 hours later, another message. Mark. Just to clarify for everyone, Robert's assets are protected under a trust. Diane is listed as primary beneficiary. Lena is not excluded. But distributions will be discretionary. Discretionary, another word meant to sound reasonable while stripping agency. Lena stared at the messages for a long time before handing me her phone. "He's lying," she said. Not angry, certain. "I know," I said, "and he just gave us something useful." "How?" "He put a false claim in writing," I said. 2 witnesses. Sandra and Diane weren't neutral witnesses, but they were still witnesses. That afternoon, I emailed David Keller's office. Not confrontational, not accusatory, just precise. "Hello, Mr. Keller. I'm writing on behalf of my wife, Lena Morales, regarding the estate of Robert Morales. Lena is Robert's stepdaughter and was instructed by Robert to contact you in the event of his passing. We understand a meeting is scheduled this Thursday. Lena would like to attend. Please confirm the time and location." "Thank you, Daniel. I didn't mention Mark. I didn't mention Diane. I didn't mention money. I attached Lena's birth certificate and Robert and Sandra's marriage certificate. Documentation without commentary." 2 hours later, Keller's assistant replied, "Hello, Daniel. Thank you for reaching out. I will confirm with Mr. Daniel Keller and follow up shortly. Best regards, Angela Polite. Neutral. No resistance." Mark's confidence depended on gatekeeping. Gatekeeping collapsed the moment someone else spoke calmly to the source. That evening, Diane posted on Instagram a photo of her and Mark at a rooftop bar downtown. Sunset, champagne flutes, caption, "Grateful for new beginnings and protecting what matters most. #family first." Lena showed it to me without comment. I saved it, not because it proved anything legally, but because it showed timing, optics, intent. People who plan to protect assets don't usually celebrate before paperwork is finalized. They celebrate because they think the outcome is inevitable. Over the next 2 days, Mark became louder. He emailed Sandra's financial advisor, copying Diane, excluding Lena. He called relatives and used phrases like settled, finalized, and handled. He sent Lena one message, short, patronizing. Mark, hey, just so you know, things are moving fast. Don't stress yourself out. We'll make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of. Like a child. Lena didn't respond. Instead, she forwarded it to me. Receipt. Thursday morning arrived. Lena didn't go to the meeting. Neither did I. Mark did. At 11:37 a.m., my phone buzzed. An email from Angela. Hello, Daniel, Mr. Keller has confirmed that Lena Morales is a named beneficiary under the trust and is entitled to attend all estate-related meetings. Please let us know your availability to reschedule a session that includes all relevant parties. Best regards, Angela. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, slower. Named beneficiary, entitled. I forwarded it to Lena. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. They lied, she said. All of them. Yes, I said. And now we know exactly how. Mark didn't know yet that the story had shifted. He found out that evening. Sandra called Lena, voice shaky. Mark says there's been a misunderstanding. David Keller wants everyone to meet together. Lena's tone stayed calm. Okay? Sandra hesitated. Mark says, well, he says you went behind his back. Lena didn't argue. I emailed the attorney. That's all. There was a pause on the line. Mark is upset, Sandra said. I understand, Lena replied. I'm available Tuesday. She hung up and looked at me. Tuesday, she said. Family meeting, I nodded. Good, because family meetings were where Mark felt strongest. Audience. Familiar ground. Emotional leverage. He wouldn't suspect that his own confidence had already done most of the work for us. That night, Lena finally told me something she hadn't before. When Robert was sick last year, she said, he asked me to witness something. What? A document, she said. He said. He wanted someone calm in the room, someone who wouldn't make it about themselves. My fingers paused on the keyboard. Did you sign anything? Yes, she said, and so did the attorney. I leaned back slowly. What kind of document? I asked, though I already suspected. Lena met my eyes. An amendment. That was the word, the kind that changed everything. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just asked, do you remember the date? Lena nodded. March 18th, last year. In his study, he said, this is to make things clear. I opened my notes and added the date, because now there was a before and an after. And Mark, in his rush to claim $10 million that didn't belong to him, had stepped cleanly into the space between them. Tuesday was coming. And, with it, the moment when confidence would meet paperwork. I closed my laptop and said the only thing that mattered. We wait, I said. And we let him talk first. Lena nodded once. She understood. Because the louder Mark got, the more room he was making for the truth to land, publicly. Mark turned the meeting into an event. He didn't say, let's meet with the attorney. He said, let's gather as a family and put everything on the table. He suggested Sandra's house, insisted on Tuesday evening, and encouraged Diane to invite anyone who might have questions. By Sunday night, the guest list had quietly expanded. Sandra's sister from Pasadena, a cousin who worked in real estate. 2 family friends who had known Robert for decades. Even Mark's college friend Paul, who knew about finance and always nodded at the right moments. Mark wanted witnesses. He thought witnesses would lock the narrative in place. Lena and I arrived 10 minutes early, as we always did, not to impress anyone, just to avoid walking into a room already buzzing with assumptions. Sandra's living room looked staged. Chairs pulled into a semicircle. Coffee table cleared except for a neat stack of folders in front of Mark's seat. Diane had placed a small floral arrangement on the sideboard, the kind you see at open houses. Mark stood when we entered, smiling too broadly. There they are! Lena hugged her mother. I shook hands. Polite, neutral. Mark gestured to the chairs opposite him and Diane. We'll get started once everyone's here. Once everyone's here, not once the attorney's here. Not once facts are presented. once the audience is seated. I took in the room quietly, noted who sat where, who leaned toward Mark, who watched Lena with curiosity instead of suspicion. People reveal allegiance with posture long before words. David Keller arrived last time as press by. He was older than I expected. Gray hair, thin glasses, leather briefcase worn at the edges. He shook hands without ceremony and took the only remaining chair, slightly off-center, not part of Mark's semicircle. That detail mattered. Attorneys who expect to perform sit at the head. Attorneys who expect to correct sit slightly apart. Mark clapped his hands together once. Great! Thanks everyone for coming. He didn't wait for Keller to speak. As you all know, Mark began, Robert left behind a substantial estate, around $10 million. Diane and I have been working closely with David here to make sure everything is handled responsibly.
Keller didn't react.
He didn't nod. He simply set his briefcase at his feet and folded his hands, Mark continued, warming to his role. There's been some confusion, mostly emotional, about how things are structured, so we thought it would be best to clear the air. He turned to Lena, smile still in place. No hard feelings. Lena nodded once. She didn't speak. Mark launched into a simplified explanation of trusts that sounded impressive if you didn't know how inaccurate it was. He used phrases like primary beneficiary, discretionary distributions, and protecting assets from mismanagement. Each phrase was designed to suggest competence without committing to specifics. I watched Keller's pen move. Not notes, just small marks in the margin of a legal pad. The kind attorneys make when they're tracking misstatements. Mark finally turned to him. David, you want to confirm? Keller adjusted his glasses. I'll clarify, he said. Not confirm. The room quieted. Robert Morales established a revocable living trust, Keller began. It has been amended multiple times. As with most trusts, the details are governed by the language of the documents, not assumptions. Mark's smile tightened. Keller continued, Before we proceed, I want to be clear about who is entitled to be present for this discussion. He looked directly at Lena. Ms. Morales is a named beneficiary under the trust and has full standing to attend and participate. There it was. Not dramatic. Not accusatory, just a fact. I watched Sandra's face shift, not shock, but recalibration. Diane's posture stiffened slightly. Mark's jaw flexed once. He recovered quickly. Of course, he said. No one said otherwise. No one had to. He had implied it repeatedly. Keller didn't respond. He turned a page. Now Keller said, there appears to be some confusion regarding the distribution structure. Mark leaned forward, eager. Right, Diane is the primary beneficiary. Keller paused. No. The word landed softly, no emphasis. No, Keller repeated. That is not accurate. Silence spread through the room, uneven and uncomfortable. Mark laughed once. Short. I think you're mistaken. Keller didn't look at him. He looked at his notes. I am not. Diane spoke for the first time. David, we discussed this. Keller finally met her eyes. We discussed your understanding. That is not the same as the trustee's language. I watched Mark's confidence flicker. Just a hairline crack. He pivoted. Okay, maybe primary isn't the right word, but Diane is... Let me finish, Keller said calmly. He turned another page. The trust names multiple beneficiaries. The distribution amounts and conditions were modified by an amendment executed on March 18th of last year. I felt Lena's breath change beside me. Steady, but deeper. Mark's head snapped up. That can't be right. It is, Keller said. I was present. Mark looked at Sandra. Mom? Sandra shook her head slowly. I didn't know about an amendment. Keller nodded. That's correct. The amendment was executed privately, at Robert's request. Mark turned back to Keller, voice sharper. And what exactly does this amendment say? Keller closed his folder, but didn't open the document yet. It clarifies intent, he said, specifically regarding access, control, and interim authority. Authority. That word changed the air in the room. Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. Well, regardless, Diane and I have been acting in good faith. Keller looked at him for a long moment. That remains to be determined. I watched Mark's eyes dart, first to Diane, then to Sandra, then around the room. Audience awareness, damage control. He stood. Look, this is getting overly technical. The important thing is that Mom is protected. Agreed, Keller said. And Diane, also addressed, Keller said. And Lena, Mark said, turning toward her with forced warmth. We've always said we'd make sure she's taken care of. Lena didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply reached into her bag, slowly, deliberately. The room leaned forward without realizing it. She didn't pull out the envelope. She pulled out her phone and placed it face up on the coffee table. Mark frowned. What's that? Lena looked at Keller. Before we go further, I'd like to ask a question, Keller nodded. Go ahead. Is it appropriate, Lena asked evenly, for someone who is not named as interim trustee or authorized agent to remove, open, and retain sealed estate documents addressed to another beneficiary? The room stilled. Mark laughed too loudly. What are you talking about? Lena didn't look at him. She tapped her phone. A photo appeared on the screen, projected to the television, which Diane had set up earlier for documents. The envelope, Robert's handwriting, the broken seal. Sandra's breath caught. That's the envelope I found, Lena nodded. You sent me that photo on Sunday. Mark stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Keller leaned forward for the first time. Who opened that envelope? Mark looked at him, eyes hard. I don't recall. Keller didn't raise his voice. You either did or you did not. Diane reached for Mark's arm. Mark. He shook her off.
I was trying to help. Lena finally spoke directly to him.
Her voice didn't rise. You took something addressed to me, Mark scoffed. You're overreacting. Lena tapped her phone again. Another item appeared on the screen. A text message. Time-stamped? Mark to Sandra. I'll hold on to the envelope so it doesn't get lost. Probably just personal stuff anyway. The room went very quiet. Keller exhaled slowly. Mr. Thompson, he said, that message establishes possession. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. I watched the realization move across his face. Not fear yet, but recognition. Recognition that this wasn't a family conversation anymore. This was a record. Keller looked at Lena. Ms. Morales, do you wish to proceed? Lena met his eyes. Yes, but not yet. Mark laughed again. Brittle, what does that mean? Lena turned to the room. It means this isn't the moment. Confusion rippled through the audience. Mark seized on it. See? This is emotional. This is exactly what I was talking about. Lena stood. I asked for this meeting to understand what was happening, she said. Now I do. She picked up her phone, slipped it back into her bag, and looked at Keller. I'll follow up with you directly. Keller nodded. I'll be in touch. Mark stared at her. You're just gonna walk out? Lena met his gaze. Yes. Sandra's voice trembled. Lena, please. Lena softened. Mom, we'll talk. She turned toward the door. I stood with her. Mark's voice rose behind us. You can't just leave this unresolved. Lena paused at the doorway and looked back. This is resolved, she said calmly. You just don't know it yet. We walked out into the evening air, cool and steady. In the car, Lena didn't speak right away, neither did I, because the exposure hadn't happened yet. Not fully. But Mark had done what confident people always do when cornered. He doubled down in front of witnesses. And the receipts were no longer just ours. They were waiting. For the right moment. Mark didn't wait. That was his mistake. By Thursday morning, 2 days after the meeting, he had already tried to reassert control. He emailed the extended family, copying Sandra, Diane, and several of the same people who'd been in the room that night. The subject line read, clarifying recent confusion. He framed it like a public service. In 3 paragraphs, he positioned himself as the reasonable party. He described Lena as emotional, the attorney as overly cautious, and the envelope incident as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. He ended with a sentence that did the most damage. As interim trustee, I will continue managing the estate until distributions are finalized. He wasn't the interim trustee. He never had been. And now, he'd said it in writing, to witnesses, after being explicitly told otherwise. I forwarded the email to Keller. He responded within the hour. Daniel, thank you. Please advise Lena not to respond. We will address this formally. David, formally, in Keller's vocabulary, didn't mean fast. It meant thorough. Over the next week, Mark unraveled his own position without any help from us. He contacted Robert's bank, attempting to check balances. Logged and denied. He emailed the property management company for Robert's commercial building, asking about transfer timelines. Logged and forwarded. He tried to access the digital trust portal using credentials that were no longer valid, and triggered a security alert that documented the attempt. Each action created a timestamp. Each timestamp stacked. We didn't intervene. We didn't warn him. We didn't correct the narrative. We let it harden. 2 Fridays later, Keller scheduled a formal trust review session, not at Sandra's house, at the firm's conference room. Neutral territory. Glass walls, recording equipment, assistant present, and at Keller's suggestion, all named beneficiaries were required to attend. Diane arrived first, dressed carefully. Sandra followed, subdued. Mark came last, alone, jaw set, carrying a leather folder like a shield. Lena and I arrived together. Keller waited until everyone was seated before he spoke. This meeting is being documented, he said. For clarity and accuracy. Mark smiled tightly. Good. Keller didn't acknowledge him. And, he opened a binder and slid copies down the table, one to each person. The trust amendment executed on March 18th, he said. Please turn to page 3. Mark flipped quickly, too quickly. Diane stopped halfway through the page, eyes widening as she read. Sandra's hands began to shake. Lena didn't look down, yet she already knew what was there. Keller spoke steadily. The amendment designates Lena Morales as interim trustee upon Robert Morales's incapacity or death. Mark looked up sharply. That's not charcoal. Keller held up a hand. Let me finish, he continued. This designation grants interim authority over all trust assets pending final distribution. It also explicitly revokes any assumed authority by spouses of beneficiaries unless separately named. Mark's folder slid off his lap and hit the floor. No one reached to help him. Keller turned another page. The amendment further specifies that any unauthorized access, removal, or tampering with trust-related documents constitutes a breach. He paused. And triggers review. Silence pressed in from all sides. Mark laughed once, hollow. This is absurd. Keller met his eyes. Mr. Thompson, you are not named anywhere in this trust. You never were. Diane stared at Mark. You told me. Mark snapped. I told you what I understood. Keller corrected him. You told multiple parties what benefited you. He slid another document forward. On April 4th, you emailed several individuals claiming interim trustee authority. He slid another. On April 6th, you attempted to access restricted trust accounts. Another. On April 7th, you contacted third parties representing yourself as an authorized agent. Mark's face drained of color. These actions, Keller said, constitute documented misrepresentation. Sandra covered her mouth. Mark! Mark turned to her, desperate. I was trying to help you. Keller didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. As a result, he said, the trust requires immediate corrective action. He looked at Lena. Miss Morales, as interim trustee, you may proceed. Lena finally looked down at the document in front of her. Then she looked up. Her voice was calm, even. I'm suspending all third-party involvement pending audit, she said, effective immediately. Keller nodded. Noted. I'm requesting a formal review of unauthorized actions, Lena continued, and I'm asking that all future communications go through counsel. Keller made another note. Mark stood abruptly. You can't do this. Lena met his gaze, not with anger, but with clarity. I already have. The consequences didn't come with shouting. They came with silence. Diane stopped answering Mark's calls that night. Sandra asked Keller, quietly, what her options were. The extended family stopped replying to Mark's emails. Within a month, the audit concluded. No criminal charges. No courtroom drama. Just findings. Mark had overstepped, repeatedly, documented, unambiguous. The trust required restitution for legal expenses incurred due to his actions. He paid, not because anyone demanded revenge, because the structure required accountability. Lena didn't take over the estate, she delegated. Professional managers, independent oversight, clear boundaries. She met with Sandra weekly, not to discuss money, but to rebuild trust. Diane kept her distribution, reduced, structured, controlled. Mark was no longer involved, at all. The envelope, the one addressed to Lena, was finally opened in Keller's office. Inside was a letter, short, direct. Robert had written, "Lena, I know you don't like conflict. That's why I trust you with this. Make it clean. Make it quiet. Make it fair." Lena folded the letter once and placed it back in the envelope. That night, at home, she put it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Nothing dramatic changed after that. No celebrations. No speeches. Just a steadier life. Clearer boundaries. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing that patience, when paired with records, doesn't need to raise its voice.